we
enough.
want to talk about an
We don't have
important
enough
story
coming, yeah.
that did happen while we were out doing various different fantastic things here to make breakthrough news bigger, and that is the referendum on the Constitution in Chile. And we are very happy to be joined by Patricio Zamorano, who is a political analyst and director at the Council on Hemispheric Affairs. Patricio, thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, Bea, how are you guys? It's a real pleasure.
No, the pleasure is all ours. Thank you so much. There's a lot to say here, I think, in terms of the referendum. Maybe my first question is I think a lot of people were surprised to see the result of the constitutional referendum because it seemed like, the vote to even have a new constitutional process seemed to have so much energy behind it, so much liveliness behind it, that I think a lot of us, myself included, thought maybe it was a little bit of a fait accompli. So maybe you could just give us some basic sense of why the Constitution, this draft of the Constitution, was rejected by those who did show up to vote.
Sure, this is very interesting. Of course, all of us were very, very surprised, although most of the polls actually said that the rejection of the new constitution was going to happen. Some of them with certain degree of difference, but at the end of the day, it was exactly what the surveys were saying. And everybody was very, very suspicious about polls because we have to remember that in the previous elections, polls failed a lot. So, for example, Boris, the new president, he won with a difference of almost 10 points, even though certain polls were saying that both candidates, the extreme right and Boris, were tied. So that was totally crazy how polls didn't get it right. In this case, just for all the people who are watching us right now, the election that Sunday was not the same electoral population that actually voted before. We have to remember a couple of years ago, the option to create a new constitution was accepted by almost 80% of the population. 8 out of 10 Chileans said we want a new constitution. Then a new General Assembly was created. A constitutional assembly was created. 154 deputies were elected democratically, and the left controlled more than 70% of that assembly. But then we have this referendum where the vote was mandatory. In the previous two elections, the vote was not mandatory. So what happened with that? 6 million new votes were exercised. 6 million in a way that the distribution of power and the distribution of will was totally affected, was distorted. So that's why we have people who were forced to vote, people who didn't participate in the previous elections. We didn't know their opinions. That doesn't take any legitimacy because it's the vote. It is the photography of the moment. But that's a good explanation why we have this surprise quotation mark that Sunday was because of that.
That's actually very interesting. And I'm also curious, when it comes to Chile, I imagine there's a right-wing media apparatus that probably also played a role in trying to demonize the idea of this new constitution. So I'm curious what role the media may have played and the right wing in Chile may have played in pushing against this. As well as, we've also heard or seen, at least, I don't know if this portrayal is accurate, but it's commonly portrayed that as Gabriel Boric having like a very low approval rating. And, he's also, his sort of ascension is attached to the idea of a new constitution. So I'm curious, the role of the right-wing media, as well as did the like less popularity of Gabriel Boric play a role in contributing to a rejection of this change in constitution?
Yes, and it's in some way, unfortunately for Boris, this election, this referendum was perceived as a way of approving or rejecting his government, and that's a mistake because this process actually was created before Boris became president. We have to remember that the whole social unrest in Chile, with dozens of dead people, hundreds of injured people who lost their eyes. I'm not sure if people remember that the police in Chile actually targeted the eyes of people. So we have around between 100 and 200 people with injuries, variation of injuries in their eyes in a horrific repression that took place under the right-wing Piñera government. So that process started there. Then Boris, his mandate was to go ahead and organize this assembly and the writing of a new constitution. And in fact, yes, his approval rate is low. Chile has been, like in the US, is strongly affected by inflation right now. We have a lot of issues after COVID. The situation that inspired this whole historic movement is still there. Education is still privatized. The health system is still privatized. The pension system is still privatized. The salaries are suffering. So the conditions are exactly the same, and the population, there's no doubt that actually felt that Boris was also responsible for that. So and Boris didn't do a good job separating himself from the state. He's the government, but he's not the state in the sense of the contract between Chilean citizens and the figure, the symbol of the state, and that contract is broken. We need a new contract, and this new constitution is extremely important. And we need to remember that those needs that inspired the movement are still there. What people rejected was a particular text. A text, I want to add to your analysis, a text that was extremely complicated. We have 388 articles. Compare that to the American Constitution, the US Constitution, which is not a model at all, but at least it's a constitution that you can handle, that you can communicate. In this constitution, this draft had 50,000 words. Extremely, it took me a day to read it myself. So imagine for the rest of the population. So it was a constitution so complex, so full of excellent rights, but also a lot of things that were left very ambiguous. It was very, very hard to defend. It was very hard to communicate to the population. And the right-wing media, of course, used absolutely all full power to discredit the Constitution. And actually, just a little anecdote, I was interviewed actually by CNN, and they were very interested in what happened there. And the rest of panelists, they talk immediately about the dirty campaign in Chile of the right. It was exactly what happened, a very dirty campaign where they distorted a lot of positive elements of the new constitution, and they created fear. And we can talk about that a little bit later.
No, I think that's a very important point, and I did want to speak to that because I think that's some of the things that I was certainly seeing is in the sort of demagogy around, what the right-wing media was saying. For instance, the fact the Constitution was talking about a plurinational state and, the way that was being manipulated to make people think it was something that it's not. So talk about that a little bit, the fear they were able to induce, because it does seem, it reminded me, honestly, a lot of so much of the presidential campaigns we see in Latin America, where they'll just, use the phrase Castro Chavismo and try to raise these boogeymen of how your life is going to be ended the next day if you vote for these people. So talk a little bit about the fear that they created through this campaign in a lot of voters.
Yes, and it's very interesting what I was saying about the CNN interview, because it surprised me the fact that a lot of the panelists that tend to be more on the establishment side, they were very aware of the dirty campaign, and that surprised me. That means that the campaign was really so strong that was actually perceived by everyone outside of Chile. And the situation was very clear. We have 2 or 3 elements that actually created fear. One of them was the rights of indigenous people, basically. We have to remember that the Mapuche people have been affected strongly. They are being affected by a security law that treat them as terrorists. And actually it's a state-sponsored terrorism, the one that is affecting them, and they are victims of violence. They are exercising violence also in the last years, trying to, in a desperate situation, to recover land that belonged to them. So the new constitution was very clear that they were going to have certain autonomy. They were going to have certain rights to have their own justice system. The declaration of respect of religious beliefs and values was written there very, very strongly. And then the right-wing media, through the traditional media outlets, social media channels, etc., etc. They created this idea that the new constitution was going to create a state, an indigenous state inside the Chilean state. So that was the view that was painted. And of course, a big population of Chile, it is moderate, it is conservative, and they didn't like that. And the other factor was due to the repression, first under the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet, later by the military police, because in Chile, the police has a military style, a military education. Because of the repression, it's been so bad that the new constitution responded to that need, and they declared that the state or the government didn't have the right to declare emergency in a way that the security forces could use to repress the Chilean people. That was extremely clear in the new constitution. Well, the right-wing media transformed that in the fact that the new constitution was going to create an environment for free crime, basically, that the police was not going to be able to act, etc., etc. And of course, we had the same issues like in the US, abortion. Abortion was a big issue for a lot of conservative people. So we have two things here. I want to be very, very clear in the analysis. We have a situation where a dirty campaign affected the vote strongly, but of course, we also have 60% of the vote. I mean, it was important. And at the same time, we have several rights that were extremely important for the Chilean future. So it's a combination of those factors.
And I guess, what happens next? Is it over? Is it like the opportunity for a new constitution is finished? Do they go back to the drawing board and try to do something and then people vote on it again? What's like, where does Chile go from here?
That's the biggest question. I mean, everybody is wondering what's gonna happen, because this result was so surprised that the temporary law that authorized this new process of writing a new constitution didn't include any measurements to create an alternative if the draft was going to be rejected. So basically, we don't have a legal path to do this. So then we have to do a political path. So what President Boris did the very first minute after the rejection was funded by the vote, he said, okay, we need to write a new constitution right away. So he called the political parties. He made some changes in his cabinet. We have people closer to the traditional structure of political parties that's actually needed. It's very clear. So what Boris is going to do first is going to negotiate through Congress, through the political parties, and then we're going to eventually create a new effort. And that mechanism is key, because the extreme right are saying we just need a group of experts, and a group of experts to write the constitution. And Boris and I still believe 80% or 60% or 70%, the majority of Chileans, they want to participate. I think it's really non-realistic to believe that after the whole mobilization, beautiful expression, especially the young people, the young Chilean community was extremely depressed last week because of this. So there are expectations. And the right-wing parties, at least, were very clear that they want to be part of that. They want to be part of a new constitution. They know that they have some leverage now. So what they want to do now is to participate in a more active way. So they're open to write a new constitution. So we are in the middle of negotiations right now. This week, Boris had a very important meeting with most of the parties, except the Republican Party. Is the same name. The Republican Party, which is a new party, very extreme on the right, they are not part of this new effort. So even the right-wing leaders are calling them, please, come to the table, let's discuss this. So that's the future negotiation, and eventually we need to write a new constitution.
Mm-hmm. Well, excuse me. Patricio Zamorano with the Council on Hemispheric Affairs, really appreciate you joining us here on the Freedom Side and helping us sort all this out.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.